confuse yourself a little bit. But I'm back in the 14th chapter of Isaiah. I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be in the first chapter of Genesis. It's going to be the two places I am tonight. I've got a whole lot I'm digging into. And like I told you, most people dig on the Godhead. I'm trying to get into the other side of it. The 14th chapter of Isaiah, I'm going to try to dig out what I was avoiding last week. I was avoiding digging in farther than I wanted to, because I wanted to make sure I could explain why I feel the way I do about it, and why I've come to the thoughts that I did. But 14th chapter of the book of Isaiah I'm going to be reading, and this time I want to stop and try to get where I want to. Bear with me just a minute. I have so many places marked. 14th chapter of the book of Isaiah, and we're going to talk about the what happened to the devil to start with. And I've looked and I've been digging and thinking about it, and there's a lot of questions that come to your mind when you get to what happened to the devil to start with. And one of those questions has to be what was here before Adam. And that is one of the things you dig into, and I'm not going to say that I'm right. I'm not going to go ahead and say that to start with. I'm not going to say that I'm right. I'm not going to say I'm 100% right, and I'm not going to say I know all of it, because I don't. But I'm just going to say what God gave me, and maybe we'll find, if you have something else or you think of something else, please tell me. Because my goal is to dig it out, wherever it comes from. That's the point. But I'm going to try to get into this, and you pray for me. I need a lot of prayer. But the 12th verse of the 14th chapter of Isaiah, and we know this part: how thou art fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of morning, and how art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations. Now that's the part I was trying to stay out of, so I'm going to go ahead and start digging here. He was fallen from heaven, and we know that. We know he was thrown out, and we know why he was thrown out, is that he tempted the angels. And I dug into it, and I came across one part of this verse that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if you don't read it. If you look into it, it just doesn't seem to. Which didst weaken the nations. And it said didst, and didst is past. So it was before he was thrown out. So the nations part is the part that started confusing me. And I started thinking, well, that means there had to be people before Adam. I got to thinking about that. Could be one thing. And then I began to think, well, nations, the Bible says in the book of Ecclesiastes, there is no new thing under the sun. There is no new thing made, and nothing is new that has not been before. And when I started looking into that, and I started reading into that, I began to think one major thing that it has to be is the fact that if we look into it and we begin to really think about it, if there's no new thing under the sun, that means everything that's here now has existed before. I'm going to be reading between two places. So I want to have the first chapter of Genesis, so that's the beginning of your Bible. That'll be easy to flip to. And the 14th chapter of Isaiah. That'll be the two places I am. I'm going to start reading in Genesis, and I'm going to have to get here to get where I want to get. But it said, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. We're going to go really far back. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And I'm going to say the beginning is when God started this creation of the earth we're on now. That's the beginning. And because it said in the Bible that the devil was a liar from the beginning. And he wasn't to start with, was he? He was an angel in heaven. So I'm going to say the beginning means the earth we're on now. That's the beginning. And most people think, well, the beginning had to be at the very beginning. No. The beginning in Genesis is when this earth was made and this earth was formed and where we are now. That's the beginning. And I want to say that to start with. And the earth was without form and void. And here we go. I'm going to start going out there on that limb. Here it comes. The earth was without form and void, and there's a reason it was. Without form and void. And I'm going to dig into that a little bit. It was waste. It was empty. It was totally wiped out. There was nothing there. And it said, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And there is a reason that the world was without form at this point, was because whoever was on it before was gone. I'm starting to dig, okay? I'm going to try not to get in too big of a hole, but here we go. And I'm going to go back to that 12th verse that said that he did us weaken the nations. I'm going to say the nations were the angels that were on this earth. The angels that were here. And there's a reason I say that. The Bible says that there'll come a day that the city of New Jerusalem will be brought down from God out of heaven, and people will be able to live there, and the angels will be there. If I understand Revelation right. The Bible also says that there is no new thing under the sun that has not been done before. And what I'm going to say is that there was a world, Lucifer, what he did was he deceived the angels into following him, is what he did. And it said that darkness moved on it, and it's talked about the darkness moved on the face of the deep. The reason the darkness was here is because the angels that were once in this world were already taken down with the devil, is exactly where they were. They followed. And the reason I'll go into that in just a minute. So I'm going to stop there for a minute in Genesis. And I'm going to get back over here into Isaiah. I have to read it together. It doesn't make sense. The 13th verse said, for thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. Ascend means that you were not there, doesn't it? Ascend means to go up. What is below heaven? Earth is below heaven. And that's where I get the part where I think the devil had to be in this world at some point before. He had a purpose here before. There was some reason he was here. And he ascended into heaven. And it said what he thought was, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. The stars of God is the planets and the stars. Is the stars of God. That's the planets and the stars. Is what it's calling the stars of God. He wants to be above everything else in the world. He wanted to be above it. And he's calling the stars of God. That's the planets and the stars that God created. And it said in the Bible, I will sit upon the mount of the congregation. The mount of the congregation, and we talked about that last week. God's throne is on a mountain in heaven. And one thing about it, that's where people worship God. That's where the angels worship God, is on that mountain. I kind of said last week that us being living in mountains, that should be something we're pretty accustomed to. That he ascended to the mount of God, of the congregation in the sides of the north. And then the sides of the north part, heaven, is where he was trying to go to. That's what's calling the north, is heaven. And you notice a lot of the time north on a map, it points up, is what it looks like to me. It points up. If you look on a map, it's pointing straight up. North does. So it says he descended to the north, and he's going to call that heaven. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. That proves one thing, is that where he was below the clouds. Where he was to start with had to be below the clouds. If it said, I will ascend above the clouds. He wanted to make himself higher than he was. So what I'm gathering here, and it said I will be like the Most High, what I'm gathering here and what I'm piecing together, and like I said, I'm going out on a limb, and it's a big limb, is I feel like he was in this world for a purpose before he tried to take God on. This earth was here, in my opinion. I feel like this earth was here for some purpose before that. And then he decided, I'm going to ascend, and when he did it, it was whoever the angels were that were on this earth before, he convinced them he was doing the right thing. And they went with him. And that's why I'm going to piece it the way I feel and the way I that God gave this to me. And like I said, if anybody has any comments or anything to add to it, please do, because I'm just digging. if it's the way that I'm digging it and the way that I see it, is the devil, what he had when he was Lucifer, he was in this world, on this world. There were angels on this world with him. And then there was heaven, the heaven and earth like we have now. But then it said that what he decided to do is that it wasn't good enough for him to be in that world. And he decided he needed to ascend above God. And that's where his downfall was. That was the downfall. When it said he deceived the nations, I feel like that meant the angels that were down here with him. He deceived them. He got them to convince that he was doing the right thing in taking on God. And that's where it all came together of it falling. And then when it said in Genesis about the earth being without form and void, that's why it was void. Is because the devil had done those angels that had been in this world, those angels that had lived in this world. It was void and without form because they were gone. They had done been cast into hell is exactly where they were, is what the Bible said is the whole purpose of it all. Is that's what it was built for. And that's why this world was empty again. Now, I know that was a whole lot of a big limb to go on. But I'm going to try to go on through a little bit. And it said, I'm going to read the rest of this part. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell to the sides of the pit. And we know that did happen. He was cast down. And I'm going to go back into Genesis and I'm going to get this together a little bit. When it said, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. I'm in the 2nd verse. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. So he decided what would have to happen. God knew that if this world was void and this world had fallen, there had to be something put back in its place. And I think that was the purpose of Adam. I think that was the reason God created Adam. If you think about it, the angels in heaven were here way before us. The angels in heaven existed way before any of us, way before Adam did. And I look and I think about that if God had those angels, why did he need mankind? And I just look at that, and that might be something to think, but why did he need people if he had angels? Why did he even need people? And I thought about one of the major reasons is an angel that was under God's authority fell to sin. An angel that was under God still failed to sin. Lucifer. He still failed. And God, the reason I want to go into a couple of things, and I want to try to make sense of why I think that there had to be something here before. It says on over here in Genesis, when he tells Adam and Eve, he tells them to go and to replenish the earth. You don't replenish something that never had anything on it. Replenish means to refill or to re-put things on it, replenish the earth. If they had to replenish it, there had to have been something in this world before it. There had to be. And I think what they were replenishing from was those angels that were cast down, and they were cast into hell is exactly what happened to them. They weren't on this world anymore. All the things that God had left and all the things he had... This world was built to be perfect, and it was built to be the main just part of it, God's creation. And those angels failed, and they failed God, and they went back, and they followed Lucifer instead. And it said in the 4th verse of Genesis, and God saw the light, and that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And this is when God's fixing his creation. And I feel like the devil, it said in the Bible, I look in John, and let me find that real quick. I've got it pulled up here to tell you where I'm at. In John, it talks about a verse, John 16:11. I'll just kind of tell you what it says, of judgment because the prince of this world is judged. And it meant the devil, the prince of this world. And that's what it always refers to him as, and it always makes you see is that he is the devil, and he was the prince of this world. It calls him the prince of the air. It calls him the prince of this world. It calls him being a liar from the beginning. And I look at all those things and I'm thinking, if he was a prince of this world, he had to have been, at some point, God put some stock in him. At some point, God had some faith in him. He had to have. At some point, God thought there was something in him that was good. And there was. Because nothing that God ever created was bad to start with, was it? Nothing he created. And what gets me as I look, and the first time sin is ever mentioned in the Bible is when Lucifer decided he wanted to be higher than God. Was the first time sin ever came. And sin had never been in the world before, because the Bible said at one time that death began, I'm not going to quote exact, death began with Adam, but life was given through Christ. If by one man's sin, death and sin came into the world, by one man's obedience, life came into the world. So sin came from Adam, is where it came from, was Adam being deceived, and he was deceived by the devil. So we go all the way back to that. So like I said, I'm just digging, and in what I'm looking at, there had to have been something before. We know that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. But it also said the devil was a liar from the beginning. And the beginning would have had to have been when God started this creation. When God started it. When God started creating the world. And God started creating the sea. And God started fixing everything that had been done and everything that had been destroyed. And I really feel like that there had to have been something before, and God wiped it clean. Because when it said in the Bible, and I'm going to go back to a verse in the 2nd verse of Genesis that said, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. There was ocean already there. It was already flooded. There was already water there. And like I said, I'm going to dig myself a bigger hole, but I'm going to go pretty far there, I guess. But there had to have been water there before. There was already water there. It was already flooded. It was already took over with water. God promised Noah. He said, I won't flood the earth again. God flooded it to get rid of sin. This was the goal. And Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. God was going to do away with his creation again. And the reason I say again is we're starting out in Genesis of the earth being flooded. From my studying and what I've read and what I've dug into, and like I said, this is just one way of looking at it. And I hope and pray that I'm on something good. I hope I am. But one way of looking at it was, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a timeline of the way that God gave it to me. It started out that Lucifer, he was on this world, and God had some stock in him. He was a guardian angel, is what the Bible says, a guardian cherub. That's what it says directly in the book. That he was in charge of watching over. You kind of think of it as a shepherd watching over the sheep just a little bit. As he was watching over the angels in this world. And this is kind of what it seems like. There was angels already here. And instead what happened is that he deceived them. And it said he ascended into heaven and he tried to take God's throne. And it said in there that there was a flood, the water, we were starting Genesis of it already being flooded. Why would God flood it is my question. Why would it be flooded at the beginning of Genesis if there wasn't something that God was already heard about? And I think just all that God had to have already been upset about it. Because that's how God destroyed it. It went later, as it said in Noah's day. He was going to destroy his creation and destroy every bit of it that he had made because sin had gotten into it again. And if you think about all the times that God has created, there's always been one thing that came against it was sin. One thing that always ruined it was sin. It always happened. He created Lucifer. Lucifer sinned, and he fell out of heaven and took a third part of the angels with him. You go back to the garden. Well, there he was. He came and he began to talk to Adam and Eve and talked them into it. Sin, once again, came into God's creation. I think God had big plans for Adam, I really do. I think he did. I think he had Adam created for a reason. I think that Adam was created as one big part of God's plan to make a better creation. And I think that us as people, Adam and Eve would have been enough in God's plan. They would have been. I feel like in the Garden of Eden, they had everything they needed. They had no reason to want anything else. They had no reason to go after anything else. But they sinned, and that ruined everything again. And it said what happened at the end of that is that the angels were there to keep them out. So I guess what I'm trying to get at, there was some reason. And I feel like what had happened before, there was something that God was displeased with at the beginning of this book, and there had to have been. I read Genesis and I read into it, and it feels like to me, we're starting out that it said in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Yeah, that's our beginning. That's the beginning of His creation, and I feel like there was something. Lucifer had already fallen. Lucifer had already been kicked out of heaven. There was something before that first chapter of Genesis when you start out reading. And that's something we'll probably never really be able to dig out. There's not enough there. But I look and I think the main thing, I want to go ahead and on the devil's part of it, the main things we know about him is that he was in heaven. He had so much going for him. God had so much stock in him. And I believe God wanted big things for him. But sin ruins a whole lot of things. It does. When it gets there, it ruins a whole lot of things. And that's what happened to him. I feel like he had something. He had something good. It calls him the prince of this world for a reason. Is he was in this world and decided he would ascend to heaven and take God's throne, and he failed. And he got thrown back down to it. So you can think that there was some reason for that. And then he comes back, and when he gets thrown down, you realize that God put it in somebody else's hands. And that's kind of just came to my mind. But God put it in somebody else's hands. Whose hands he put it in? He put it in Adam's. Adam and Eve, he put it in their hands. And said, go and multiply and replenish this earth. And it said, and to subdue it, basically, that everything in this world belonged to mankind then. Go out into the world and start replenishing it. God gave the favor to somebody else. I feel like God's angels failed. And we look, a third part of them failed. And then God had to create something else to try to not fail. There had to be something else to try to not fail. Something else to stop from failing. But mankind failed too. So I don't know. I know in the end of Revelation, I know the way that it reads and what God's plan is, and I don't know what His plan is after that. I don't know. But I know that God has tried so many times to create something that wouldn't fail Him. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to get at. God's tried more than once to create something that wouldn't fail Him.
Since there'll be a new heaven and a new earth,
He's going to do away with them. This is where the sin started.
I guess the one thing that's always bothered me with the devil and sin, how did he know sin?
That's what I've always...
How did he, what gave him? I mean, everything about God is love and joy and no sin about Him.
Hey,
I've always questioned that in my mind in the Bible. Where did the devil ever know the sin? Who told him to sin?
Yeah, who got started?
Yeah,
I
mean, everything's got to have a start. So was there another one you're talking about before this heaven and this earth? Was another one that someone already knew to sin?
It makes you wonder, and that's the part I'm kind of getting into, is I feel like what happened was, this earth I feel like is the one that's been here. I'm getting into a can of worms that I may not be able to get out of, Carl, so give me a minute. But I really do feel like this is the earth that has existed. This is it. And I feel like what happened is that it was kind of like, it said, he asked the devil one time, he said, where have you been? He said, well, I've been walking to and fro in this world and up and down in it. When he came and presented himself, it said that the sons of God presented themselves, and that was the angels, and the devil presented himself. And that tells me that there's a way from earth to heaven. There is a path from earth to heaven, because the devil goes to heaven and presents himself, and he goes to earth, because of the way the book of Job reads. So that tells me that heaven and earth have always been able to go between them. And that would mean that the angels could go between them.
You know, with the devil being an angel, and he got kicked out of heaven, there was something wrong there, it wouldn't have gotten done.
Something wrong.
He was sin there before he got done.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, there had to.
How do you know the sin?
Right.
One thing we know is he brought it up with him, because it said he ascended.
Could he be obedience to God? He didn't. He's trying in God.
He didn't want to obey, did he? He didn't want to. And
You know not to. I mean, us, we're babies born.
Williams.
Kind of like I preached here one Sunday. Till we get to the age of accountability, we don't know sin.
Mm-mm.
And an angel shouldn't know sin.
You would think an angel wouldn't.
I mean, so I'm like Sister Anna Pearl, where did it come from to know to sin? And you said he brought it up with him, so that's what makes you think.
It's come from somewhere.
There had to be something that he got while he was here.
He wanted to be above God,
You want to be above him.
so that was wrong too.
So that tells you that angels have free will. If you're reading the Bible and you look at it that way.
They have free will, but they still won't know to.
Yeah,
That's, I mean, a kid only knows what you teach it.
yeah.
That's why we say they look at how you follow you.
Right.
And if you shine in front of them, they're gonna shine. If you do something wrong, they're gonna do something
Well,
wrong.
the devil couldn't have got it from God because God's pierced. But he couldn't have followed him and got it.
What I've looked into and what I've read, and I'm just, like I'm saying, I'm reading commentary and digging and going with what I feel and praying about it. And what I came out of more than anything was that this world, for some reason, and going back to that verse in Genesis when it said that the darkness was upon the deep, when it was, and I really do feel like for some reason, and I'm not going to say why because I don't know, for some reason this world was flooded at the beginning of Genesis. It was already flooded. There was some reason it was flooded. And if you go back and you look into, and I'm going out on the thing here, but science you can read and you can look into, and some people say science and the Bible don't go together. Well, some of it does. I was reading some places where they have found entire cities at the bottom of the ocean. They found entire places at the bottom of the ocean. We know for a fact God flooded it in Noah's day. We know that. That's what the book says. But then we start at the beginning of Genesis, it's already flooded. It kind of makes me wonder if there was some reason that God flooded it before. There was some reason, because then he promised Noah, and there's a reason he promised it, that he said, I won't flood it again. I'm not going to flood it anymore. There's a reason it's not flooding again.
When he made earth, it didn't make water.
It didn't say he created the water.
That's what I'm saying.
It never said he created the water.
The land.
It's he divided the, I'm hearing you saying it, he divided the land from the water. It was already flooded at the beginning of Genesis. He created the heavens and he created the earth. There was some reason it was already flooded. And I kind of feel like that was like the same reason as Noah's day, displeased. The angels failed him. And that was kind of God's way of wiping it clean. Water washes away a whole lot of things. If you read in the Bible, when it refers to washing yourself clean, it mentions the water a whole lot of times as being something that can make you clean. The water and the blood is the two things it mentions. And I think about that God kind of wiped it clean at the beginning of Genesis for a reason. And I think it was because those angels failed him. They failed him. The angels that Lucifer was down here with, I can kind of see how it works. If you get a bunch of people and they're not, if you get out of sight, I'm going to put it this way. If you have somebody who's above you in a job, and you're out of their sight, it's a whole lot easier to do things that they're not pleased with. If the devil was down here on this earth, because it said he ascended into heaven, and he ascended and tried to get higher to God. If he was down here in this world, it would be so much easier to go ahead and say, what about you? Do you think I'd be better than God? What about you? Do you think I would be better? Do you think I would be better? And it would be easy if you're out of sight of the person who's above you. It's kind of easy to say, well, I don't know. I don't know if you would be or not. Then the part that, like I said, the part like Dad said, the part that bothers me the most is how did he know to sin? How did he know? And I guess the part that I'm going to go out and say is he didn't know. He just went ahead and went with it. There was something that just drove him into saying that he wanted to be better than God. He wanted more. And it might have been that this world just wasn't enough for him, and it's not. We know it's not. But if God created the earth, and God created it to be perfect, but the devil wanted something more than that. And there might have been a reason that some of those angels were on earth instead of in heaven. I'm not sure why they would have been there. But it just feels like when it said he ascended and he wanted to be above the clouds and he wanted to be above all that, that's heaven. It's like he's talking about something that he's seeing above him, not where he is. And that's the part that gets to me, is it really does feel like, how could he have known that he needed to have something better than he had? It's just kind of
It's jealousy back there, and it might have been that.
It's jealousy. And I mean, and he must have been the culprit to bring the sin in. It just makes you wonder that sin had to come from somewhere. Huh? He is greedy, yeah. He wanted what God had. He wanted to have it. And that's what makes me think, and like I said, I'm kind of going some directions here, but it says he's the prince of this world. And that's what makes me think he was in charge of this world at some point. He was in charge. And if I'm in charge of something far less than Carl is, then I might wait for the point that Carl's out of the picture and say, well, I've led this, why can't I lead that? Except that God went out of the picture. The idea was to get rid of God. And it may be God put him in authority for some reason. The prince of this world is what the Bible says. And that's what makes me think that God put him in authority. And then he wanted more. He wanted more. And maybe that's where it came from. He wanted more than he had.
And that just brought around the sin of it.
That brought the sin of it, is the jealousy. When he started getting jealous of what God had.
Now he's got his choice. You got God knocking on your heart here, you got the devil over here. You got a choice here. Choose this one or that.
We got the choice.
That's your choice you got.
And it's...
You got to believe it or not believe it.
And right there is why it reads so many times. It starts talking about a divided house won't stand. And it starts talking about all those different things. For a long time, Lucifer existed in God's kingdom. And it was okay. You know, he had to have existed for a while in God's kingdom and been happy with it. If God put him that far in charge, like I said, God had faith in him. I really do feel like that God had faith in him. For a while, God had faith that Lucifer would do the right thing. If he put him as the prince of this world and in charge of this world, he had to have had faith in him. But then what happened was he ascended and he thought he was going to be higher than God. They were cast out. And this earth was destroyed. Whatever Lucifer had made of it, God destroyed it. That's why it was flooded at the beginning of Genesis. God was already fed up with that and flooded it. And then you see later in Genesis, God creates man. God tried to make man be something that they wouldn't fail him. And then you go on down, man did fail him, and it goes right back in a circle, and God got ready to destroy it again. But Noah found grace in God's eyes. God was getting ready to wipe it clean again and start over. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And that's what led to Jesus coming to redeem people, is that God decided if man could find faith in his eyes enough, one like a lamb being led to the slaughter said, I'll go. And that's why Jesus had to come, is to put God and man back together. God and the angels, there's some of the angels that will never be redeemed back into God's hand, and he knows it. There's some angels that will never be back in heaven. They will never get back there. But the one hope that there still is that God does reach out to mankind still and tries. And there'll come a day that will end too.
Also, there's things that you can do, God, you demon. Okay?
Hardness of heart and a reprobated mind is what the Bible says. That's when you went too hard.
So, Eric, do you think Lucifer was in heaven at first, and then God brought him to earth to be the ruler of the earth, and he maybe got jealous because he knew what was in heaven, and then when he brought him to earth?
It makes you wonder if he created him there, or if he was placed there to start with in earth, but he knew heaven was there. It makes you wonder if it's one of the two, like you said, but it almost makes more sense if he's seen it before. But in the book of Job, you can see that the angels could go back and forth. So that means he had the ability to see it. And he seen something higher than he had.
Well, he not had to have been there, had such a desire to have it. He would have had about participated in heaven.
He's been there. He had been there, and he had seen it, and he had seen what God had.
He wanted it.
And he wanted it.
You can't be jealous of something you ain't had.
Yeah, you can't be jealous of something that you have, can you? And there was some reason that God put him in charge of earth. And the angels being started, and I assume some angels stayed on earth a whole lot, and they started talking to the wrong one, who began to say, how about you just back me? I'll take over, and then I'll give you a good place. I can see, you know how it works. Somebody starts saying, if you'll back me when I'm in charge, you'll have a good spot. And I can see other angels, those other angels are probably as lower than him. If he was the ruler of earth, and those angels were not, they were below him. So, I'm starting to see a picture play out, and I'm not saying that's the way it was, but it makes too much sense in some ways. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, something had to let him know what sin was.
And I do think it was seeing heaven and him not being in charge of it. But the other angels, you got to think, had to have been other angels that wasn't in charge either, and they didn't sin. But there was something different about Lucifer. Something different about him. It did say that he was one of the most beautiful angels in heaven. And it talked about him being the son of the morning, which means that he was a very bright angel. He was a very light. And the son of the morning makes you think that he was a very favorable angel in God's eyes. Because it talks about, I'm going to tell you how close it talks. It calls Lucifer the son of the morning, and it calls Jesus the bright morning star. So how much stock did God really have in Lucifer? A whole lot. A whole lot. So it was almost like, and I know that Jesus is at the right hand of God, and I know that Jesus is the one that said in the beginning, let us create man in our own image. But I feel like Lucifer had a special place in God's eyes for him to be called the son of the morning, and it calls Jesus the bright morning star. He had to have had a whole lot of favor in God's eyes. So I guess what I'm kind of getting at, Lucifer did have a kingdom. Lucifer did have something under him. I feel like he was in charge of this world to start with, and that's why he was so set on making sure that mankind would fail, is because he did. That's why he was in the Garden of Eden. That's why he was there. That's why he went, and he began to talk to them and say, well, why don't you go and try that tree? He wanted them to fail the same as him. Because if you were ruler of something, and then somebody took it away from you and jerked it out of your hands and handed it over to somebody else, you better believe you would try to trip them up all you could to get rid of them. Lucifer failed. The angels failed. God created man. That was the whole reason man was even created. I always wondered why God created man, and now it makes sense why God created man. Is the angels even failed. We did too. So it kind of puts you there, don't it?
He was sorry that he created us.
And started to flood it again. So we were really one person away from God wiping his creation clean again.
It didn't say nobody else did. So.
It just said Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's all it said. Like I said, I've really been praying and digging, and I really want to try to find something that I feel like that was finding something that I didn't know. Is that there had to have been something, like you said, I always knew there had to be something before Adam, but I understand what it was. It was Lucifer. It was him, and it was his kingdom on this earth that God had put him in charge of, the prince of this world that failed. And that's the part that gets me more than anything. He's even seen God face to face and failed him. He's even seen God face to face and failed him. Was created by God and failed him. And you know, some people say, well, he was created by God and failed him. Yeah, we were created by God and failed him too. You know, you look at it, we was created too. Adam was created. It said that God took the dust of the ground and made Adam. Adam and Eve sinned because of the devil. The devil in the tree, you know. And what also, okay, this is going to be one more part, and I'm trying to come to a close, but I'm just still digging, I guess. I'm going to try to dig this out too. The Garden of Eden had something in it that doesn't really make sense if you really dig in it. God didn't want mankind to fail. God didn't want them to. God created them. But that tree was in that garden for some reason. And there was a fruit on it, the knowledge of good and evil. That wouldn't have even existed if it hadn't been for sin. And right there, I don't know if I want to get on that limb. I don't know if I want to get on that limb, Kyle, but I'm going to say something, I guess, that makes a whole lot of sense. There's a tree in heaven that bears 12 manners of fruits, and there's a tree, it said that in Eden there was that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The Bible said there's no new thing under the sun. Was that tree already here? How long's the tree been there? That makes you wonder, how long was the tree there? And who put it there? So, makes you almost wonder if he had something to do with it, don't it? Yeah. There's a part I'm going to dig into. I've been reading a little bit of commentary, and they're commenting on the Garden of Eden before Adam came to it. We might do some digging. So, any other comments? I've enjoyed this. There's a whole lot to it. Whole lot to it.
The Bible said Adam was the first man to sin, right?
Yeah, Adam was the first man to bring sin. He brought sin to the world.
Right, but it didn't say nothing else didn't sin before that.
No, it just said Adam was the first man to sin. He brought sin back into the world, if you think about it.
Well, sin had to have already been here to have known good and evil.
Mm-hmm. That tree was put here by somebody. And it had the knowledge of sin on it. But it's a funny thing that a serpent knew a whole lot about it, wasn't it? It's a funny thing that the devil knew a whole lot about the tree. And started saying, if you eat of that fruit, you'll know. You eat of that fruit, you'll know. It makes you wonder if either he put it there or he already ate of it himself. And that's a whole can of worms that I have no idea where to go to. So that's a worm I'll probably never find the one to. Yeah, that one probably stay capped. I'm going to do some digging and see if I can find anything. You know, the book, like I said, you read the Bible and there's some things we won't find, but there's a whole lot of things to find. And like I said, I'm trying to dig out. I really thought about this, and If you can dig out the devil and dig out the stuff about him, you know your enemy pretty well. And it's good to know your enemy, because you can figure out all the things about them. And I kind of just always wanted to understand why that he did what he did. And it's hard to understand. I don't understand why Jesus did what he did. I'll never understand that one, Kyle, why he gave his life for people that didn't deserve it. Because I know I didn't.
He paid a big debt.
Paid a big debt. But then I look at the devil and I don't understand how that somebody who was right there in heaven and right there and seen God face to face could fail him. I guess we'll never know the answer to that one. Anything else before I sit down? I hope I made sense. I hope so.
This thing in the Bible, God is love.
It does. 1 John 4:8. He that loveth not knoweth not God.
His love for us.
Yeah. The love.
What makes me
Maybe
think what
God
we
done that
see.
just to show the devil he's gonna be the top man in heaven. That the devil ain't got nothing.
Yeah, the devil had his place.
He could have died on the cross just for that, just shows that Lucifer, where he stood.
It's something that Lucifer could have went right on rolling down here probably. But he wasn't satisfied. I appreciate everybody's attention. I'm telling you.